We've got some nice pieces of red oak here with lots of deep grain to be filled. And previously we experimented with using shellac and with using epoxy as grain fillers, but today we're going to be using Aqua Coat, which is a water-based grain filler, and we'll see how it works with and without using a pre-sealer like shellac. Then we'll compare the results of these with using epoxy like this Z-poxy finishing resin. We'll prepare for the Aqua Coat by sanding everything to 220 grit. Then I'll apply 3 or 4 coats of 1 pound shellac to one of the pieces and then sand it back to 220 grit as well. In this first test, I'll be applying the Aqua Coat in very thin coats using my hands, but a squeegee or a credit card works fine also. I'll demonstrate my entire process for this first coat, and then I'll edit through all the other coats more quickly. One of the nice things about Aqua Coat is that it's water-based and easy to clean up, and it also has a quick dry time before being able to reapply. The package says 30 to 45 minutes of dry time, but I usually wait about an hour. You're supposed to apply it using strokes across the grain and then wipe off the excess going with the grain to leave a thin coat. Now I'll do the same thing to the piece without the shellac pre-sealer. The next step is to lightly sand with a fine grit sandpaper of a 320 grit or higher. I'm using 320 grit here, and I sand it just enough to rough up the surface so that the next coat will stick easier. I'll use a plastic card to test the grain fill after each coat. We'll skip ahead real quick to coat number 4, and as you can tell, we still have a ways to go here. By coat 6, it sounds like we're making some progress. Here are the results after the 8th coat, and it seems like this piece with the shellac pre-seal is about a couple of coats ahead of the other one. After coat number 9, it's really hard to hear the cards scraping the grain, but there's still grain to be filled here. The 10th coat looks almost like a finish at this point, so I think I'm going to do a final sanding in preparation for an oil finish. And after sanding with 220 grit, this is the piece that received the shellac pre-seal. This is the piece without the shellac pre-seal. And this is another piece from the same board that shows where we started from. So again, here are the 2 pieces that we just filled with the Aqua Coat. The one on the left had the shellac pre-seal, and the one on the right was just purely Aqua Coat. And next we'll fill the grain on these 2 pieces using the epoxy. And I'll do the same thing using shellac on one and just pure epoxy on the other. Like before, I'm going to apply several coats of shellac to the piece on the left as a pre-sealer. The epoxies are a bit more methodical to work with because of the mixing of the resin and the hardener, and the mess that you make and the precautions that you have to take when working with extremely strong glue. This one has a 30-minute set time, so it's easier to work with than your 5-minute epoxies, although they work good too. The epoxies also require more cure time before sanding and reapplying, but it usually takes less coats to get the job done. Even after the first coat has dried, it looks like there's almost a finish on there already. But we'll sand these down with 220 and do it again. And that's sounding pretty good after the first coat. So we'll rinse and repeat with another round of epoxy. And this is what it looks like when it's wet. It almost, again, looks like a finish. And it often is used as a finish, but we're just going to use it to fill this grain. And there it is when it's dry. So we'll sand this down and see where we're at. This could really be considered filled at this point. If it were a real project, I'd probably add one more coat, but let's go ahead and see how it looks after adding some finish, and we'll see how it compares to the Aqua Coat boards. Here they are side by side awaiting a coat of finish. There's definitely a color shift between the 2 methods. The Aqua Coat can have more of a pale appearance with adding as many coats as we did, and the epoxy yields more of a neutral to slightly warm tone. The finish we'll be using is True Oil. I usually apply 2 very thin coats, then lightly sand, Then add 3 to 5 more thin coats. And here we are at the moment of truth after finishing with True Oil. The piece that was pre-sealed with the shellac looks good, although technically I feel it could use a couple more coats of the Aqua Coat. The piece without the pre-sealer shows obvious signs of grain. I think I'm actually going to sand this down again and add a couple more coats of Aqua Coat and see what happens. So I'll get to that after we finish looking at these. The pieces filled with 2 coats of epoxy look good too, but another coat of epoxy would have really given them a mirror shine. This is the piece where we used the shellac pre-sealer. This piece almost looks better than the piece with the shellac pre-sealer. So let's see if we can get a glassy finish on this piece that didn't receive any of the shellac pre-sealer by adding a couple more coats of the Aqua Coat. After 2 coats of Aqua Coat, we'll refinish with the True Oil again and see what we get. This was the original result after 10 coats of Aqua Coat and finishing with True Oil. And it seems like a couple of more coats was all that it needed to make it look really good and virtually glass-like. It's still not perfect, but it looks really, really good. Okay, I've got 2 more pieces of red oak here, and I'm going to try this experiment again, but this time using thicker coats. Even though the 10 coats in the previous experiment seemed like a lot, the nice thing is that the coats dry super fast, often in less than 45 minutes. They require very little sanding, and it doesn't take a long time to apply a lot of coats. Plus, this stuff is easy to work with, and it cleans up with water. So I'm going to slightly exaggerate the amount that I leave on the surface, and I wouldn't recommend doing this because it takes longer to cure, and it might shrink over time or cause other problems. After lightly sanding with 320, here we go with coat number 2. I'm just using my gloves to wipe some of the excess off and even out the coat. And it sounds like we're making more progress this time after the second coat. We'll lightly sand again and apply coat number 3. And then do the same with coat number 4. And after this dries, I'm going to sand with 220 back down to the wood and start adding the True Oil finish just like before. And for the moment of truth, again, it actually looks pretty good after just 4 of the thicker coats. This is the piece with the shellac pre-sealer applied to it. The piece without the shellac pre-sealer still has a ways to go and could probably use a couple more coats. But I hope that these experiments are helpful in some way. I feel like the Aqua Coat would work really well with filling most grain on most types of wood, and that the epoxy is also an awesome grain filler that can be used also as a finish. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, but both are also fun to work with.